Let me ask now Congressman Cohen to ask his question.
Thank you. I've got a few, but first, pretty overall encompassing. You've got a lot of knowledge of the Middle East. Based on the history of the Middle East and how Iraq was created in the 20th century, the history of tribal leadership and the divisions that exist there between Sunnis and Shia and all, do you think it's possible that there can be a democratic government established in that region?
Congressman, I think it's very difficult. It's very difficult to establish, was very difficult to establish one here in America. It's difficult to establish that sort of thing anywhere, but what you can't do is do it for another people. I think that they have to evolve their particular style of popular participation in government. That may not involve all the formulae that we use in ours. Elections may not produce the same results. In fact, they didn't the last time. What happened was everybody voted on the ethnic basis or the religious basis that they came to. I think that most societies have different ways of accomplishing some of their basic objectives. They may not always, in fact, usually aren't the way we'd like to see them do it. But I think when I first went to Baghdad, or the second time I went to Baghdad, I first went in 1947. The second time I lived there for nearly a year. Iraq was relatively harmonious, and people had a style of living that was satisfactory in most instances to them. Not necessarily the way we would, certainly not necessarily the way we would do it. But we can't really, I think, establish the way people live all over the world. And it's not going to be a full-blown democracy like we'd like to see it for the foreseeable future. But I think there is, if this plan that Senator McGovern and I came up with is implemented, I think there will be a satisfactory level of popular participation and a satisfactory level of security.
Mr. Michael Heidingsfield is from Memphis, Tennessee. He's the head of our crime commission, and he spent part of 2004, all of 2004, I think, and part of 2005, something like that, helping to train and create the Iraqi security forces. He was one of 20 people who just went over there on a study of the Iraqi security forces, and he told me that in this Iraqi security department that they have a high-rise structure, semi-high-rise, like 8-10 stories, and that each floor has a different group of people based on their background and their sect, and that the people in the Iraqi security department are afraid to go to different floors and won't ride the elevator for fear they will be attacked in the elevator by people in the security departments on other floors. Have you heard about this? And
no.
Well, this was disturbing. I mean, Mr. Heidingsfield was just come back, and he said he'd been in Iraq. He said it's no better now than it was when he left. And that chaos in the Iraqi security department, where there are Shia on one floor or Sunnis and Kurds and whatever, and that they're afraid of each other within the same building, I think that's a microcosm, maybe the problem. One last question. I know we can't go to Iran, but how would you see the people in America and the West acting to deter or stop Iran from having a nuclear capability and potentially using that on humanity?
Let me start with your second point and say I'm very glad you raised that. I think that the first thing that I would do if I were in your position is to hold a hearing, something like this, on Iran now, prospectively, rather than to wait until after it happens. I think that the first thing that I learned in government and in business and even in the academic community is that in order to negotiate anything, you have to pay some attention to what the fellow on the other side of the table is thinking and saying. And I was asked to write a peace treaty for the Middle East during the 1967 war. And President Johnson at that time decided that he did not want to negotiate with the Egyptians. that he wanted to simply impose an American peace treaty. And I said, I don't think that you can negotiate on a basis like that if you're trying to kick the chair out from under the table of the man on the other side of the table. You need to know what he's about and what he's trying to do. And I think we need to take that first step on Iran. We need to find out what's motivating them. And we need, to some extent, at least theoretically, to put ourselves on the other side of the table and try to think what we would do under similar circumstances. My connections with Iran are now somewhat antiquated. I dealt with Iran all the time during the time I was in the government. I've been back and forth many times since. But if you talk to almost any people in the Iranian establishment of any dimension today, they're terrified of the United States. And I have to say that if I were an Iranian, I would be trying to get a means to make sure the United States didn't attack them, because the President's talked about the axis of evil. Our basic national security defense policy, which, astonishing to me, was published, shows that we have taken on the right to deal with anybody in the world we want to, anytime we want to, anywhere we want to, at times of our own choosing, for the crime of doing what they wanted to do in their neighborhood. And I think we've got to back up from that kind of position on the world. I believe very firmly, from my own experience during the Cuban Missile Crisis and various other issues that I was involved in the American government, that nuclear weapons of any kind are a danger to everybody everywhere, and we should do everything we can to slow it down and then to abolish them as fast as we can do it. But we have now decided that we don't mind nuclear weapons when the people we approve of have them. So, for example, we've agreed that India is okay about getting them. Former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, with whom I used to disagree a great deal, has now come up with the idea that what we need to recognize is that not only Iran, but many other countries will soon begin to acquire nuclear weapons, and that we can look forward in the reasonable future to the time of your children and my grandchildren of a situation in which there will be many countries with them. And my strong belief is that the more there are, the more likelihood there is of a war or even an accident. And the amount of near accidents that have happened are absolutely catastrophic. I think today, to put a pinpoint on this, that Iran does not have nuclear weapons now, but it certainly is trying to acquire them, I think, although I have no inside information. And I also believe that if you gave me $1 billion today, I could buy you a nuclear weapon. And I assume that any government could do the same thing. So I think that the idea that we're going to focus on Iran is, in that dimension, misses what we need to do to actually stop them from doing it. I think we're doing exactly the opposite of what we should, or what we think we're doing. If we want to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons, let's not tell them we're going to destroy them. But there have been leaks, as you know, recently that we picked out 1,200 targets in Iran to bomb. Well, that virtually includes the entire economic infrastructure of the country. If you told me that in a Wild Western movie, I'd reach for my 6 gun.
Thank you very much, Dr. Polk.